Welcome to It's Been How Long? The podcast about Cherry Hill High School East students from the late 1970s and early 80s. This is Kara Siegel. I'd like to welcome in Rob Rowland to the It's Been How Long podcast studio today. Hey, Rob.
Hi, Kara. How you doing?
Good, good. How are you doing today? Thank you
Good. I got
for.
to tell you, I have loved watching you connect with people in the class. It's been a lot of fun hearing what everybody's doing, and it's hard to believe it's been this long. Wow.
Yeah, well, thanks for agreeing to be on the podcast. That's great. So, as I start every podcast, where are you? What are you doing? What keeps you busy?
Okay. I've since the early '80s, I've lived in Orlando, Florida. Um, I'm not far from Disney. Um, it's lovely weather, although I do still come home a fair amount. Um, after I left Cherry Hill, I ended up going to the University of Florida College of Medicine, and I became a physician assistant. Um, After I finished at UF, I ended up going to the University of Nebraska for some postgraduate training in neurosurgery. I've worked for a spine surgeon for, oh God, the last 25 years. Um,
As a
um,
PA?
yeah, as a PA, I love it. It's great. It's been a great life for me. Sometimes I, for fun, still moonlight in the emergency room just to keep my clinical skills up because after so many years working spine surgery, you kind of forget about a lot of other medicine. So I really love doing both things. Um, I have two adult kids um, that live in Orlando as well. They're my pride and joy. Interestingly enough, they both work for Disney in management roles. So we have the hookup to get into Disney. So that's a lot of fun.
That's
Um,
great.
in fact, it's hilarious because my son will be like, "Hey, you want to go to the park?" Because his office is nowhere near the park, and it's like, "Yeah, okay." So we spend a lot of time going to the theme parks and checking out the restaurants and doing the cruises and all that kind of stuff. So that's been a hoot. Um, I still come back up to New Jersey. When the kids were little, I decided I need to take them to Ocean City. I used to spend my summers in Ocean City growing up, and I guess they were like 6 and 8. And I rented a place out at the end of the island where we used to stay. And it was kind of funny because we packed the car and drove up, and this person looks at me and says, "You drove from Florida to come to the beach in New Jersey?" So anyway, they kind of love the boardwalk, and they, when we go up, they get to see all their cousins. So basically, every year or two, we go up and spend a week or two at the shore, and I can catch up with my family and friends. So it's good. Um, but my brother still lives in Cherry Hill, so that's exciting. He still lives in Barkley Farms. Um, he's telling me he's going to die in that house. So I guess I'll have a Cherry Hill connection for a while here yet.
Okay. All
Um,
right. So what do you do for fun down there in Florida?
well, it's just all the lifestyle that you have living in Florida. I'm lucky being in Orlando because I've got nice beaches literally an hour away, kind of like it was for us at home,
Hmm.
and on the Gulf side, Clearwater, St. Pete, the beaches are really pretty. The Atlantic beaches aren't as pretty, but it's still the beach. So that's common. And plus, um, you know, it's interesting. We have a lot of parks around here. There's a springs not far from me, and one of the fun things to do is canoe down the springs
Oh, nice.
because the water flows pretty good. You just have to watch out for the alligators. When you're down in a canoe, the alligators are a fair fight.
Oh,
But they leave you be. They don't. They're not interested in you for the most part. Every now and then you get a curious one, and it makes it exciting. But most of the time they back off. So that's kind of fun. Um, and just the other thing that's fun is we like going down for weekends to Miami. Miami's always fun, and I'm kind of centrally located because I'm about 2.5 hours from Miami, about an hour and a half from Jacksonville, and an hour from Tampa. So it's kind of fun because if there's a concert or a comedian or whatever, we can access it pretty easily. We get a lot of people coming through, um, and that's always fun to do.
So
Yeah.
did you start cheering for Florida teams, or are you still
Well,
a
so no,
Philadelphia
I'm
fan?
still tried and true a Philly fan, and Eagles, and the Phillies. It's fun to go over to spring training.
Yeah.
We'll go over for a day trip, uh, and I did it a lot more when it was guys I would like. For example, like when Schmidt was still playing, and those guys, I was far more hardcore on going to spring training. But it's still fun. We get over to do it, and for us, it's a short day trip. We
Hmm.
go over. If there's a game, we can catch it. Um, and still love doing that. I'm pretty hardcore rooting for my Gators because that's uh, you know that was school for me. But I'll root for any of the Philly teams, and then likewise. I will claim a Florida team if they have success, but that's been tougher in more recent years. So that's kind of fun too. So I've really enjoyed living down here, and would not trade the snowy weather and the cold for anything. It's been
Nice.
delightful.
So,
Yeah.
so since you spend time in the ER, can you recall a Florida man story for us by any chance about somebody who
Uh,
walked into ER like with an alligator in their pants or
well, the ER I work at is actually one of the closest ERs to Disney,
oh,
and so what we do is we get a lot of people that aren't real smart. Like I had a kid who was visiting from Minnesota who successfully got bit by an alligator,
oh,
and he was a teenager too. I kind of think I
trying
was
for a
kind of
selfie or what?
yeah, I think I was kind of wondering if he deserved it because you
Oh,
kind of got to, you kind of got to work at it to get bit by a gator, unless you just don't see them. Because
yeah,
down here, in some of the lakes, the water is pretty murky, so
yeah,
you don't always see it. But yeah, that's the fun thing about the ED is you just never know what's going to come in,
that's
you
true.
know, and
That's true.
it's we get everything from tourists to homeless people to just neighbors who need a hand. Um, but it's some of my personal favorites is I had a girl who we'll call her a Florida girl, and she came in and she was obviously pregnant, and she was telling her mom she was a virgin, and as I'm putting my hands on the young lady's belly, I can feel the baby kicking me, and the look on the mom's face when we had to explain to her that the kid was pregnant, and like 7 months pregnant. She was a little thing, and it was hilarious. And mom was just dumbfounded how that could happen with her being a virgin. So
Hmm.
anyway, we won't go
Eh,
any farther on that, but
okay.
but it was mom struggled
Quite,
to comprehend that. Let's put it that
yeah,
way.
quite the conundrum.
Yeah.
Um, So, how did you enjoy spending your time back at East? Any clubs or teams or
Well,
things?
I was pretty. I didn't do a ton of stuff. I played in the band. I got a chance to
Remind
play.
us what you played.
I played the baritone euphonium, and I could also play a little bit of trombone. Although Eric Muller will tell you that I'm not very good at any of it. Um, but I succeeded in limping along and taking the classes and hanging out with the guys who really knew how to play. I also wrestled a little bit, and I played football for a few years. Um, and and pretty much kept to myself. I didn't venture out too much otherwise. But had a good time. East was a good school. It gave me a good education. It's served me well, and really can't complain. I did enjoy the teacher podcast,
Yeah.
uh, and that was good. That might be fun to see if there's any more out there that are still with us that would be willing to chit chat. Because
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to put out my feelers. Not everybody in that generation wants to relive it, I think.
well, some of them probably take medication for it, so
Yeah,
you know,
could
so
be.
I'm
Could
sure
be.
I was responsible for a few taking medication. That's for sure.
So did
Um,
you have a job back in high school?
I had a couple of cool jobs in high school. I used to cut greens at Tavistock, the golf course over in
Oh,
Haddonfield.
okay.
And it was a great summer job because you'd get started early, get out and get the course ready. And then they didn't care if you golfed in the afternoon.
Hmm.
So I had a job I could go golfing after the work was done. So really, really liked that, and actually worked there with a couple of friends who were a year ahead of me at East.
Hmm.
Um, and that was kind of cool. My uh, my senior year, I actually, after graduation, I actually ended up working in a brewery.
Oh, cool.
There was a little brewery in downtown Philly that uh, was pretty cool. It was right on Front Street, down underneath the Ben Franklin Bridge.
Hmm.
And this was back, we really didn't have much in the way of OSHA back then. And the fun thing about working in the brewery is that there was beer. People drank the beer, and you'd be working in around the brewery, and the foreman would be walking around passing out beer. And I'll never forget the first night I worked, I was wrecked by the time I was done work. I could barely drive home.
Oh,
Um,
I suspect you shouldn't have.
but
Hmm.
it was a fun job, and ultimately the brewery got sold. It was a little brewery, and it got sold to Schmitz,
Yeah.
and then Schmitz ultimately obviously closed. But it was a fascinating thing learning about the beer business in Philadelphia because it's a very seasonal business.
Hmm.
Apparently, the old breweries in Philly used to have to work hard in the summer, but did very little business in the winter, a lot less business in the winter. So that was a pretty cool job while still going to school. I'll tell you a funny story. Um, my son went to a small college in Southwest Florida, and I ran in. Dale Ruby's kid went to the college, and I ended up reconnecting with Dale because our kids were uh, in in the same university. So that was kind of funny. I hadn't seen him in years, and then I saw him a second. I ran into him a second time at a wedding in Texas. He was actually, I guess I saw him the first time at the wedding in Texas, but it was fun catching up with him because he lives in South Florida,
Okay.
and he's got a lovely daughter, and that was kind of fun to see. I've been surprised to see, looking at the website, how many people actually live in Florida. That kind of surprised.
Yeah, I'm hearing the more interviews I do, the more I find out people are in Florida. So
Yeah, it's fun. We ought to have a Florida get together sometime or something.
you could do that. You could do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So have you had an opportunity to do any travel around the country or around the
Well,
world at
I
all?
I live to travel. I've done trips all over. Uh, Early on, I was hardcore doing cruises, and I've seen pretty much every Caribbean island there is.
Hmm.
And after a while, that that loses its luster. But no, done a couple trips to Hawaii, bunch of trips out west. I've been to Yosemite a couple times.
Nice.
Loved hiking in Yosemite. That was gorgeous. Have spent a fair amount of time in California as well. Um, the California trips, been to LA, San Francisco. Um, I've been to Hawaii a number of times. I've also been to Europe. I've done the southern end of Europe or southern end of Europe pretty well. I love Italy.
Hmm.
Have had a couple trips to Rome and Venice that are just spectacular. But it's amazing. Every time I go someplace, you just kind of learn stuff about where you're traveling. It kind of opens your eyes about how other folks live. Um, And then the more I travel, the more it's like, well, God, it'd be really cool to go here or there. So I still got a pretty big list yet. Hopefully, I'll knock out more of it as I get closer to retirement. I'm kind of lucky. Um, I'm kind of in the twilight of my career. I'm down to only working, a handful of days a week. So I get to squeeze in some travel in between.
That's great.
Um, yeah.
That's-
Uh,
So, is there a class or a teacher at East that influenced you beyond your high school days?
you know, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't really thought about. I was thinking, I was wondering, what are you going to ask me? And oh, here's a good one. Um, you know, I'll tell you who I really got a kick out of, to be honest with you, is Phil Gordon, the physics teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And not because he necessarily influenced me in a good way.
Okay.
It was more of how eccentric can you be and be a high school teacher. And if you remember, he drove that, I'll never forget, he drove that Porsche. And he was one of the most interesting people that I that I ever encountered as a teacher. So he was somebody. But we had a lot of uh, good teachers at East. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
loved Mr. Belchikoff. I think was the
Mm-hmm.
guy that you had. I thought he was just a solid stand-up guy. Um, uh, there was a teacher, Mr. Canzanese, who I thought was also a stand-up guy. And I never really thought I had a teacher that was bad,
Mm-hmm.
that just didn't belong doing it for a living. So that was, that always made you feel good.
Yeah.
That you seem to have a place where they were trying to look out for you at least. And that was something that when I started looking around here when I had kids, um, uh, you know I was really worried about the Florida schools because I would see the kids in the neighborhood and they were not the kids from the Cherry Hill neighborhood. And so I ended up sending my kids to Catholic school actually. And that turned out to be a good thing because all the kids were fairly well behaved. So, and, uh, and that was good.
Yeah.
My daughter decided that she needed to follow me. So my daughter ended up going to the University of Florida. Um, and then after Florida, she went to Harvard.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so she kind of knocked it out of the park, and we actually had some of the same professors at UF, so that was
Mm.
kind of fun to share. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So
UF
did you? Yeah.
people up home don't. UF's a pretty darn good school,
Mm-hmm.
you educationally. Although I imagine uh, Jane Hightower might disagree with that being a Tennessee grad,
Oh,
but um, but I laughed when I saw where she went to school because I was like, she'll get a kick out of me being a Gator. That'll be funny. But
mm.
anyway,
Did you have a high school sweetheart?
no, I was pretty darn quiet with that kind of stuff. You know, uh, it's pretty funny because you look back at our Facebook pages, and I'll just say that. I see some folks that I regret not being involved with that looks like their lives turned out pretty well. But with that being said, it's no, I stayed away from that kind of stuff. I was too
Mhm.
chicken.
Okay.
So anyway, it took a while to figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And um, you're do you have a current? Uh,
So I'm actually single.
okay.
I got divorced a number of years ago. I had been married for over 30 years,
Oh.
and it was just time to do something different. And so, I'm lucky. My kids are still an active part of the life, and it's interesting. I'm still in touch with my ex-wife's family more than she is, but that's another story.
Okay.
And so yeah, so no, I'm just kind of laying low and hanging out and not doing much of anything. You know, my my kids
Okay.
want to occupy the time. Come on, Dad, we got to go do something.
All right. All right.
Yeah, no,
Do
it's
you
all
have
good.
do you have friends from East you're still in touch with either
You know,
directly
it's
via
interesting. I've got a
Facebook
couple
or
of buddies. Um, it's interesting. I was trying to think about that. I really, other than Dale, the only person I think I've ever seen from my class was him in the last 20 years.
Oh, okay.
You know, I unfortunately don't get up to the reunions,
Mm.
uh, but I do have some friends that were older than me. A guy, Mike Lutz, who grew up on my street, and he was in the class ahead of us. And so I still see him because he actually lives in Florida.
Oh, okay.
Um, so, I was kind of shy in high school. I didn't get out and make too many friends. So,
Okay.
but it's it's still fun to see everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Any standout memories from high school? Something that sticks with you to this day, either in a class or outside activity that
Um, I just I just really enjoyed, like, I used to get a kick out of watching the pep rallies for like
mm,
football and that kind of stuff. It
yeah,
was kind of, and Spirit Week, I guess, would be the thing that I laugh about, watching how um, some of the classes were really motivated spirit wise.
yeah.
That was kind of fun to watch. In fact, I think our junior year we actually came close to beating the seniors point wise for Spirit Week, and I remember how funny that was because our class apparently was more enthusiastic than the class ahead of us.
Yeah.
Um, but um, but yeah, that's probably stuff that
Hmm.
sticks out. And I loved watching everybody excel at sports too. We had some pretty good athletic teams, and they were a
Yeah.
lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
The band was good too, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
used to love watching the marching band because that was something I could never do.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, I
Yeah.
was I didn't have any timing, so I wouldn't have been a good marching band person. Uh,
That didn't stop me, at least for a year or so.
yeah.
Um, Anything you want classmates to know about you, wish they knew about you back then, or want them to know about you now?
Well, it's interesting. I wonder. I don't know, because I don't hear from people. I don't know what the perception was of me back then. You know, um, I was I was always smart, but I never wanted to work that hard, and it took me a while to figure that out. So, you know, I ended up, excelling academically, but not in high school.
Hmm.
you know, and for me, it wasn't about necessarily being the smartest kid in class, but the kid who was willing to work the hardest. And that's something I figured out in college,
Okay.
you know, and so that's the fortunate thing for me, is that I figured it out before I was 50. Um, in fact, in my 20s actually. So that worked out
Well,
well.
going the route of PA and neurosurgery PA, that's a pretty
Yeah,
impressive
it's
endeavor
not
right there.
it's not nearly as impressive as it sounds.
Oh, okay.
Okay. um, but it's been a good living. I'm lucky. I work for a group of guys that are the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. They give you the shirt off their back, and that's it for me. When I get up and go to work, I feel like I'm not going to work. I'm just going to take care of people, and for me, that's whether it's in the ED or in the spine office. And that feels good, because
Hmm.
when you help somebody who's otherwise not in the best of shape, it's very rewarding. One of the things I also do in my spare time, we have an organization down here called Shepherd's Hope.
Hmm.
And Shepherd's Hope, it's actually run by the various churches, no specific denomination. But what they do is that uh, the public schools down here have the nursing clinics. And what the public schools do is that they let the churches overtake these clinics, and the various churches that have a lot of physicians in their congregations, even synagogues, run clinics that provide free care. our local hospital is kind enough that they will give us free lab and free radiology.
Hmm.
So if I have somebody that comes into the clinic, we can get them whatever they need, their mammogram, their CT, their blood work. And we can kind of help these people out that don't have any other resources. The hospital is also kind enough to provide specialty coverage um, uh, for people that need something urgently. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. My current boss, um, he always used to say, God, I really admire you going to do that. You know, I wish I could help. I wish I could help. And I had a guy who came into the Shepherd's Hope Clinic who was having back pain. And apparently it was initially thought to be like a work comp injury. And workman's comp got an MRI and he was filled with lymphoma. His
Oh,
spinal
wow.
canal was actually crunched off because his lymphoma was so bad. And I ended up calling my boss that night. I was seeing him in the clinic, and I said, "You remember how you told me you always wanted to help somebody at Shepherd's Hope?" Yeah. Well, here's your chance.
Yeah.
And so we got this guy and what was fascinating is he had worked as a bellman at a Disney hotel, and he came into Shepherd's Hope because he had no insurance, needed help. We ended up getting him admitted. We actually ended up having to operate on him to decompress his spine, but at the same time, we were able to get oncology involved, and they were able to get him hooked up with some sort of temporary insurance and get the guy the care that he needed. And I'll never forget that when he came in to see us for one of his follow-ups, he was just incredibly grateful, and it was a really kind of a special moment. But it was at that point that he fessed up that in South America he was actually a physician, and
Mm.
that he had moved here trying to find a better life, and was just taking him a while to get on his feet. So that was kind of a good moment. And you
Mm.
know, it's interesting because at the free clinic you get all kinds of people with all kinds of agendas.
Mm.
But the reason I like working there is a couple of times a night, you actually help somebody that was legitimately not in a good way, and we help them in a way that made a difference in their life. And you
That's
know,
great.
that's kind of what it's about. And
For sure. Yeah. That's,
anyway, and
yeah.
it's a fun organization because they really try to help you. There's you know because the the clinics that are run by for what you know whatever church or synagogue who runs it, and some of them really get into it, helping people with resources if they're homeless, you know, that kind of stuff, and that's fun to see that end of it as well. But that's been a pretty good part of my life as well.
Well, that's wonderful. That is
Yeah,
really,
yeah, no,
it really is.
it's just the right thing to do. That's all, you know.
Yeah.
So although
Well, thank you for
working
doing that. It
well
was
working in
it's a
the
lot
ER
of a
also
need. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
kind of funny because I was teasing with somebody that now when I started working in the ER, I can just stop Shepherd's Hope because I see all the people without insurance in the ER. It's
Yeah.
pretty funny.
Yeah.
But no, I'd rather. The nice thing about Shepherd's Hope is that, um, you know, those are people who are trying not to game the system. They're
Hmm.
just coming asking for help, and you just can't say no to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool stuff.
For sure. So we're back in 1980. We've just graduated. You're looking out 44 years. Do you see yourself here?
Pretty close.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is that um, you know one of the reasons I um, my grandfather was a physician,
Hmm.
and he had retired when I was little and moved to Florida. And he passed away 18, 20 years after he retired. And when we had his funeral, one of the things that struck me were the amount of old patients that showed up to tell us stories about him. And I was, wow, if I could have an impact on somebody's life like that, that would just be something special. Growing up, I always like, oh no, I just need to go to medical school. But, recall that Rob was lazy in high school. Rob wasn't about to, do the academic rigor to pull all that off. And so it was just a matter of figuring out how to do it. Um, and so for me, PA worked, and I get the same rewards, I think, that I would have gotten the other way.
Hmm.
And so, I would have to say that I'm not shocked I am where I am. You know, um, you know, being the pump attendant at a gas station was also a thought. Um, and in fact, it was funny. My office manager asked me what I was doing today, and and that's what she said to me. She says, "Well, at least you're not a gas station attendant." And I said, "The truth of it is, if I was a gas station attendant, I would have declined to do this." So she looked at me and she says, "Ah, well, at least you can be proud of what you do." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." So it's it's good stuff. Yeah.
Well, I think any job, done well is
Oh,
a
amen
job
to
worth
that.
doing.
But one of my, I mean, high school, there was definitely, peer pressure to succeed.
Yeah.
And obviously, we've had an awful lot of successful people in our class, and I
Hmm.
think that's wonderful. Um, you know, and
Yeah.
but I wasn't sure I was going to be that person. So, but it's
I don't
it's
know.
it's worked out.
And again, I hope I hope you understand this message. It's certainly the message that I hope I'm sending to everybody who's listening to these is I'm not trying to pick and choose success. I think we're just fascinated. I don't know if it's our um, generationally or who we are or where we were raised or any combination of those things. I find it fascinating to hear everybody's story. If you are a gas station attendant, I bet you there is any number of stories you're going to be able to tell me.
Sure.
Um, so I think I have learned so much about our classmates, had the opportunity to interview people that I didn't hang out with or didn't have in
Yeah.
classes or whatever. And so I've just found it fascinating what 40 years has brought to all of us. And I just think it's
Yeah.
great. It's great. And I think that's what everybody's finding interesting is
Oh,
all the different and varying experiences that we've all had. So yeah, I mean I'm really
well,
enjoying all of that.
oh, I'm loving. In fact, I'll turn your podcast on and just listen to it in the background. It's
Yeah,
it's it's fun. It's like, in fact, I look at some of the names like, huh, who was that? I don't
yeah,
remember them. And
yeah,
then they start talking, and it's like, oh yeah, I kind of remember who that was.
yeah,
And that's really a lot of fun.
yeah.
It's it'll be interesting to see how long you can keep this going. I bet quite
Yeah,
a
so
while
it's,
yet.
yeah, well with with 800 people, right? You'd hope. So long as they're willing to sit down and chat, I'm willing to do this. So best piece of advice you'd go back and give your 18-year-old self, or maybe you gave your 18-year-old kids.
Well, for me, it would have been to study harder in middle and high school, because it was definitely the way I did it. It took a little more effort, um, but that would be the key thing. I could have saved myself a few years of proving myself academically to get where I am. Um, and the other thing is that for a while I was a real workaholic. I worked really hard early on, and I don't know that I had to work that hard, you know, and I'm certainly making up for it now. My day job is 3 days a week,
Hmm.
right now, and I can kind of do whatever else I want to fit into that. So, that's the message is just take some time to continue to gain experiences too, because my parents, when I was a kid, our vacations were Florida or Ocean City.
Hmm.
My parents really never thought to travel,
Hmm.
and get into Europe, get into other parts of the United States, Canada, Mexico. It's really been educational, in terms of how fortunate we are in some ways, and
Hmm.
that's and
Yeah.
I would tell myself to travel more as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm making up for it though. It's okay.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
So we've reached our fast and furious finish, um, which doesn't have to be either. Did you have a favorite TV show or a favorite book or a favorite movie back in high school?
Um, oh, I had a couple. Yeah, um, book wise, I love the Andromeda Strain. I used to
I
read it over and over again. I was fascinated by that. In terms of
enjoyed that
TV,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, in terms of TV shows, I was a huge MASH fan. In fact, to
Hmm.
this day, I'll still watch MASH if it's on, um, and that's pretty. It never disappoints,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and as far as movies go, I don't know. I guess I'll just never forget being in line at the Ellisburg Circle for Jaws in the middle of the summer,
Oh yeah.
and then going to the beach after that, and it was like, huh, maybe this isn't such a great idea anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah.
funny, yeah, good stuff.
Did you have a favorite musical group, artist, or genre of music back in the day?
Well,
I'm gonna shout out Reggie and Heaven's Edge.
yeah, no, I have followed Reggie and watched that stuff, and watched his music, and that's just incredible. Um, my, I'll be honest with you, my brother was a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and by default, I got drug along to that. And the the best part of living in Florida is that front row tickets aren't that bad,
Oh,
compared to home.
okay.
Um, and so a little off side story. One of my good friends is for those who are Springsteen fans. One of my good friends is an attorney, and um, he's here in Florida, and his college roommate from law school is actually Max Weinberg, the drummer's agent,
Oh,
and over the years he's really given us the hookup for backstage stuff and
awesome.
meeting them all, and living in Florida, nobody he's not getting bugged to have meet and greets in Florida a lot. So we've had a lot of fun going to concerts here, um, and watching him. And I've even come back home and seen him in New York a couple of times because I had the hookup. So for me, it was watching Bruce and following his music and still enjoying it.
Well, that's
So
great.
it's good stuff. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite place to hang out with anybody in school?
Well, the place I still miss to this day was Olga's. Going to Olga's after a night out was
Hmm.
just the best thing to do. Um, and I get disappointed every time I drive by that intersection when I get home. It's like, oh, it's gone.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess Kaminsky's was in the mix, and
Hmm.
I think it was what Coastline or the place
Yeah,
over
there
on.
was a good, yeah.
Yeah, those were the places I used to end up.
Hmm.
Um, when I was younger, obviously the most important thing was finding a liquor store that would sell you alcohol, and I was always a bigger kid, so I had a little more luck than
Uh,
most, being able to.
Not to mention you were heading to the brewery in Philly.
Well,
Uh,
I'm telling you, that was a eye-opening thing. The thing about the brewery is that it was a unionized brewery, and most of the day shift that worked there were all these just lifers who had done it all
hmm.
their life and were members of the union. And a little funny story about that. I was making union money and working like 80 hours a week. So I was
Ooh.
getting really well compensated. And the shop steward comes up to me and says, "Hey, you want to buy a stereo?" And he's got this brand new stereo. And I was like, "Yeah, okay." So through the summer, I start coming home with all this stuff. And I realized that he's got to be a fence.
Yeah.
and he picked me because I had money in my pocket,
Yeah.
and I wasn't smart enough to figure that out early on. But I had nice speakers for my car and had a nice car stereo and got a lot of nice stuff that summer for cheap.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Stolen but cheap. Um, so so here we go.
Oh God. Yep, I remember that picture.
Yeah.
I
Did
might
you
still
like
have
it?
that tie.
No
Eh,
quote.
it was okay.
All
I don't
right.
think I put a quote, did I?
You
I
didn't.
don't.
You didn't have a quote.
Yeah,
No.
no. I
Yeah.
I couldn't think of anything to say much better than I can to think of anything to say now. So,
So my next to last question is, did you what language did you take at East, and have you found it useful?
well, yeah, I actually took Spanish.
Okay.
Okay, and it it's been good because when I'm in the emergency room, sometimes you just got to find your way through it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't tell you that I'm by any means fluent,
Right.
but I can get a pretty good history without needing a translator.
Oh, that's
So
great.
I can't complain about that. Yeah. In fact, I remember her name was Miss Ben, Benn, um, and she was good. I took her for 2 years, and
No,
it seems to have been good.
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So, final parting shot. Anything you want to say to anyone or everyone who might be
Just thank
listening?
you. It's been fun watching, and I know it's a lot of work you put into it,
Yeah.
and your efforts are admired and appreciated.
Well, I'm enjoying it. You're very welcome. It's been a real labor of love. So thank you for agreeing to be on with me today.
Thank you.
All right, and if I'm
Appreciate
down
it.
in Orlando at the park, I'll give you a
Yeah, look
shout.
me up. I'm not far.
Okay, that's great, Rob. You take
Yeah.
care.
You
Thanks.
take care. Hey, thanks for chatting, Kara. That was great. We'll see you. Okay.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye. Thanks for joining me on It's Been How Long? The podcast about Cherry Hill High School East students from the late 1970s and the early 80s. A shout out to my cousin Brad Corbett, whose podcast We Weren't Friends in High School inspired me to do this podcast and whose advice and encouragement have been so helpful. Thanks also to my husband, Randy Coughdale, who read all the fine print on the podcast hosting website so I wouldn't have to. And thanks to Jeff Lyons, content consultant and guinea pig, and to Deborah Smead, also content consultant. And thank you to all our classmates who are listening in. See you next week.